I certainly hope you're having a wonderful Saturday, and welcome to WFME Reports. My guest is Jeanne Buesser. Jeanne is the president and the founder of the Apraxia Network of Bergen County. She's here today to talk about her remarkable life, her children, your children, and things we really need to think about and know about. And thank you so much, Jeanne Buesser.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's great to have you here. Tell us about the Apraxia Network of Bergen County. It's a fascinating story, and it really comes about through your own experience being a mother.
Thank you. I started the organization 9 years ago when my son was born. He was approximately 4 or 5 years old at this particular point when I had started the organization, because my son had low muscle tone in the face and the body and was not talking at all.
Was this something that you picked up very early on in his development?
Well, comparing him to his older brother Daniel, my first son Daniel was talking a blue streak in a few months and running when he was 9 months old. So he was talkative and running and walking and playing extremely fast. When Adam was born, there was complete stop. There was no babbling, no cooing, no talking whatsoever.
So no making no sounds, no baby noises.
No baby noises.
What was your first reaction to that?
I figured, well, maybe he was just a slower developing child than my first son. He's not the same. Maybe he's different. At that particular point, I was not sure that there was a problem until my son started going to not talking as he got older, as far as becoming a toddler. And then a friend of mine said, well, you know what, you should look into early intervention, because your son's not babbling. He's pointing to things, but he's not babbling, not cooing, not making any noises. He's just nonverbal. That's when I started going to early intervention, and my son got diagnosed from a developmental pediatrician with early diagnosis of apraxia.
Now tell us about apraxia. What is it?
Basically, it's a severe neurological speech disorder. The difference between apraxia and autism is apraxia is a speech disorder versus the autism is a language. To clarify, when you have a child with apraxia, they don't have the beginning sounds of speech. They have a loose wire in their brain or connection, so they're not able to produce the beginning sound of a word. For instance, cookie. They couldn't even say the k sound. Versus the child with apraxia may say the word cookie, not necessarily on command, but they can say it. So comparing my two sons, that was definitely a difference.
So you're saying that someone who has autism will make sounds, any kind of sounds, even if it's gibberish, where someone who has apraxia is not going to make.
Well, also, the difference, there's a fine line between the two. When you have a child with apraxia, they also can babble in a sense of their own language, it's called jargon. But they cannot enunciate, they cannot articulate. So they might be babbling in a sense of not words that we understand, but they understand. So it's their own language until the articulation comes up, which is made from intensive speech therapy.
So you took your son to early intervention, and he was diagnosed, and how did that make you feel? Where were you at? You already had a son. You were already a mother of a 1, 2, 3-year-old?
At that particular time, my older son it was 2 years difference between my older son and my younger son.
Now, your oldest son also suffers from autism as well.
No, my older son didn't have any issues whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
What happened with my older son, he passed away when my younger son was 1 year old.
Oh, my gosh.
From a cancerous tumor. So that we are already, as I gave you one of the articles that I'd written, he already was deceased at that particular point. So I was on my own trying to reel with what had happened with my second son and finding no support, and no one knew any information. Going to the library, they talked about speech therapists having had studies and research studies and things like that, but mostly they were for older I would say, individuals who had strokes or something of that nature. So there was nothing that was parent-friendly as a parent to understand what to go for, what to look for, speech therapies and things like that at that particular time when my son was very young.
Here you are finding out that your newborn baby suffers from apraxia, and at the same time you're going through this horrible thing where your firstborn is actually dying from cancer. I mean, it almost seems so overwhelming. How did you deal with that? How are you dealing with that emotionally? I mean,
I wear many different hats. With my son, my first son that passed away, it was within 24 hours of diagnosis. So it's not like I had a long period of time to deal with it. It was, when it was a cancerous tumor that he developed for 6 weeks from start to finish. So just to give you some examples, so we really didn't have a lot of time at that particular point to really grasp what was going on because there was no real symptoms. It was such a rare form for my first son. With Adam, who's my second son, it was very hard because, as I said, there was no resources, no support. We didn't know where to go at this point, even though we had early intervention, because we had never met any other parents, or I should say I had never met any other parents going through this. So my son was not talking really, was not really verbal, point to a lot of things, and then he would point to us to say the word for him. So that was just to give you some example of what had happened.
So he would point to an object and he would want you to tell him what it was.
Exactly.
But he wouldn't repeat it necessarily.
Correct.
So he understood language.
Exactly. He knew exactly what he wanted. We just couldn't understand him because at that particular point he wasn't verbal. And became, as he got older, it became jargon, as I said, his own language, because he was not articulating. He was talking a lot faster in his head than his muscles could articulate and be understood. So we knew he was saying sentences because he was saying in his own language certain phrases, even if they couldn't be understood by us. So he knew what he was saying. He'd point to something and we're like, what? But he knew exactly what he wanted. So at that particular point, when we started doing sign language with him, and he did not, at the beginning, he did not want to do sign language. He wanted to talk. He did not want to do sign. So there's something called the Picture Exchange Community System, PECS, which is many speech pathologists will use. And what it is are little pictures of individual things. For instance, a car, a TV, objects in the kitchen, the bathroom, and they're on little place cards, which are laminated. And you would put it on a manila folder, which had Velcro on it, and the child would pick what they want. In other words, even though they weren't talking English to you, they'd put on a folder with a word. For instance, they might have a word we, and one particular card, another one want, or I want, or drink, or me, or milk, or whatever, and put it on the board. And they'd have about, I would say, anywhere from 30 cards that they can pick through, depending on the activity. Whether it's a lunch, they're talking about lunch, they're talking about doing an activity on TV, going to the park, playing ball. So that's one way of the child would, even though they couldn't be articulative at that particular point, they would put it on the board, on a Velcro board that you could bring anywhere. It's almost like a vanilla folder. That's how flexible it was, that you could bring it anywhere. So this way the child would not only be less frustrated, but you could communicate with them that way.
And that was successful while you were communicating with your son. He was able to grasp that and use it productively.
Exactly. In other words, my son loved trains when he was younger. He still does. But
Who doesn't?
Right. But when he was a toddler, he didn't want to, as I said, he didn't want to use sign language. He wanted to talk. And so I would ask him yes/no questions. Now, he could not say yes, and he could not say no, but he could nod or shake his head. So that's why I would give him choices about toys and things like that for him to play with. So therefore, he was not as frustrated.
My guest here at WFME Reports, her name is Jeanne Buesser, and she is the founder and the president of the Apraxia Network of Bergen County. Obviously, you found the Apraxia Network of Bergen County through compelling personal experience that you just told us about. But tell us about the organization, and how long ago has it been since you started it, and what are you now doing? And I know that you feel that there's an important message you want to get out to the public about this.
Basically, my message is this. When I started the organization 9 years ago, as I said, there was no support. There was one other grassroots organization called the Cherub, CHERAB.org, which was run by my friend Lisa Gang, G-E-N-G. And she has also written a book called The Late Talker, which is a wonderful, wonderful resource book that can be gotten anywhere, in any bookstore and things like that. It talks about apraxia, written also by Dr. Agan, who's a very well-known, not only former speech and language pathologist, but also developmental pediatrician here in New York City. And it talks about not only apraxia warning signs, but it's for anybody, not only from a parent's perspective, but also from a professional perspective. And it gives a lot of resources in there, not only insurance resources and things like that, but other things people may not know about. Going back to what I was saying earlier, one of the problems was when I had started this organization, I did not know how to run a nonprofit or how to apply for a nonprofit. So I called the IRS, and I got this wonderful gentleman who was able to walk me through the steps on how to apply for a nonprofit, and therefore how long it took, and I eventually was able to get the nonprofit status. So I'm not just an individual group, but therefore people could come to the meetings and attain credits from professional developmental credits from professionals that come to the meetings or things like that for their degrees.
So essentially you started the group because your needs weren't being met, and also you needed some sort of support group, right, which you just didn't have at that time?
Correct.
So did you feel very much you were kind of out there on a limb?
Exactly.
Like you're the Lone Ranger? And,
exactly.
Yeah, and you're wondering, are there other mothers, other parents that are going through what I'm going through right now? There has to be. Was that your thought?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you found out that indeed you were correct in assuming that.
Yes. Yes. There's a lot of parents that may not necessarily know the beginning sounds being an issue or the warning signs of apraxia. If the child is not developing properly, if they're not speaking or cooing or babbling, if they have problems with low muscle tone in their cheeks and their body. There's 4 different types of apraxia. The first type is verbal. Verbal pertains to lips and the tongue and the cheeks, but it also talks about blowing and kissing, just to give you some idea about having weaknesses in that area. Then you have the oral, pertaining to the cheeks, the tongue, so you have more low muscle tone as far as using your tongue going from side to side, licking things off your lips, that as far as being a weakness. Because if your child has a weakness of that, then they have a problem with eating and things like that. So it's all related. That is just verbal and oral. Then you have global. Global is pertaining to the head, where you have a weakness in possibly where the eyes go right to left in the neck and the head. So you have a problem with a child doing a 2-step program. Walking and looking at the same time or turning their head is extremely difficult because you have that weakness. Then you have limb, L-I-M-B, and that pertains to the low muscle tone in the body, arms, legs, trunk, things like that. So therefore, now not all children get weaknesses in all parts. Some have in the face and the lips and things like that, where other ones may have one part of the body. So in other words, a child with a limb apraxia would have a problem walking and catching a ball, so they'll need occupational therapy and physical therapy possibly, as well as intensive speech therapy. And the more you get, the better. Because at this young age, from infancy on, if they only have a window approximately to 5 or 6, when you can really start changing the way the child thinks and is receiving information.